wealthy widow entered the boardroom with a janitor. And what happened next left the most powerful people in the company completely speechless. It was supposed to be just another high-stakes meeting, the kind where numbers rule, decisions shape futures, and no one in the room breathes too loudly. Harrington Enterprises had called its top executives together, and everyone came prepared, or at least they thought they had. The air in the room was thick with the kind of tension only major financial decisions can bring. Polished shoes tapped quietly beneath the long glass table, cufflinks gleamed under the recessed lights, and quiet whispers floated between board members, each more anxious than the last. But all of that energy shifted the moment Elena Harrington stepped inside. Everyone knew who she was, the widow of the company's founder, the last remaining symbol of the old guard, and one of the most influential figures in the building. Her presence always demanded attention, but this time, the room fell into an entirely different kind of silence, because she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man who looked like he didn't belong anywhere near a boardroom. His uniform was plain, a deep navy janitor's suit, and in his hand, as if by accident, he still held a cleaning rag. No briefcase, no documents, no prepared remarks, just a quiet, almost apologetic expression, like he was bracing for someone to tell him he was in the wrong place. Executives exchanged looks. Some leaned closer to each other, clearly confused. Others sat back in their chairs, arms crossed, waiting for an explanation that made sense of what they were seeing. The CFO, Lawrence Whitman, finally tried to break the silence. "Mrs. Harrington, But Elena didn't let him finish. She raised a hand, calm, steady, and firm. "I invited him," she said. The room froze again. Daniel, that was his name, looked as if he wanted to disappear. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw locked tight, and he kept his eyes low, away from the senior executives now staring directly at him. These were people who signed seven-figure checks, who negotiated mergers before breakfast, and he was the guy who emptied their trash cans. He didn't belong here, at least that's what they all thought, but Elena had other plans. She took her seat at the head of the table, the position once occupied by her late husband, and looked around slowly, not with arrogance, but with intent. She saw the unease, the discomfort, the silent judgment, and she let it hang there. Then finally she spoke. "I know exactly what's going through your minds," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably direct. "And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't care." That sentence hit like a drop of ice in the center of a boiling pot. "No one in this room expected to see Daniel today," she continued, "but he's here for a reason, and before we talk numbers, you're going to hear why." Now every eye was back on Daniel. It was a strange moment for him. He was used to walking the halls like a shadow, cleaning up coffee spills from glass tables no one said thank you for, emptying bins under desks where no one even looked up. He had spent years in this building, unnoticed, unacknowledged, practically invisible. But today there was nowhere to hide. Elena leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the table. Her voice softened, but her words cut through the room. "A few weeks ago," she said, "I took a different elevator than usual. I was on my way to a legal review meeting when I passed the staff break room on the 6th floor, not a place I typically visit. And I heard a voice. It wasn't idle chatter. It wasn't someone complaining about shift hours or vending machines." She paused, letting the room lean in. It was a conversation about investment strategy. Some of the executives exchanged skeptical glances, still unsure where this was going. "At first," Elena said, "I assumed someone from finance had wandered in there by mistake, but when I looked in, I saw Daniel, sitting with another custodian, explaining market dynamics, risk behavior, investment timing, clearly, confidently, not reading from a book, not guessing, explaining." For the next 15 minutes, she hadn't moved. She stood outside that break room, listening. Daniel talked about how certain stocks were overvalued based on emotional trends, not fundamentals. He described how wealth isn't just about making money. It's about understanding timing, pressure, and patience. He referenced 2008. He dissected post-crash opportunities. He didn't sound like a hobbyist. He sounded like a man who had lived the financial world, not just studied it. And I remember thinking, Elena said, looking around the room, why is someone this sharp pushing a mop and not managing assets? So she walked in. Daniel went silent the moment she stepped through the doorway. His face went pale, his posture stiff. He looked like a teenager caught sneaking into the VIP lounge. I asked him one question, she continued. Where did you learn all that? Daniel had hesitated, long enough for her to notice the way his fingers tapped the table, a nervous rhythm. Then, after a breath, he answered. My dad owned a small business, he'd said, taught me everything he knew. I studied finance for a while, but after he passed, I couldn't afford to stay in school. Elena studied him for a moment, just one moment, but in that silence, a decision formed. I want you to come with me to a meeting next week, she said, her voice firm. Just sit in, listen, and if I ask you something, answer honestly. Daniel froze. A meeting? He echoed. With my executive team, she clarified. His eyes widened. He opened his mouth to protest. I don't think You don't need to think, she interrupted gently, but with authority. Just show up. Everything inside Daniel told him to say no. He wasn't meant to be in rooms like that. He didn't belong at boardroom tables or inside discussions that decided futures. But something in Elena's expression told him this wasn't a request. And somehow, against all logic, he said yes. That's how he ended up here, standing in the center of a boardroom surrounded by people who were silently waiting for him to fail. No one said a word. The silence was heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of an antique clock mounted on the far wall. Daniel could feel his own heartbeat, loud, unsteady, pounding in his ears. Every instinct in him was screaming, "You don't belong here. Get out." This was a room for people who wore $1,000 watches, who had diplomas from Ivy League schools and portfolios built on generational wealth. He wore a janitor's uniform less than a week ago. One of the executives, Martin Caldwell, leaned back in his leather chair and adjusted his tie. His smile was polite, but the condescension behind it was clear. "Mrs. Harrington," he said with a dry chuckle, "I'm sure we all appreciate whatever this is. But is there an actual purpose?" Elena smiled. Not the warm kind. The kind that reminded you she wasn't playing the same game as everyone else. She was playing something bigger. "There is," she replied. "Daniel is here because I want him to weigh in on today's discussion." A visible ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Lawrence Whitman, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably. "With all due respect," he said cautiously, "today's agenda includes several major financial decisions. I'm not sure he would have any relevant insight." Elena's expression didn't change. "That's interesting," she said calmly, "because last week I overheard Daniel explaining long-term investment strategies in the 6th floor break room, and he made more sense in 15 minutes than some of you do in a 2-hour presentation." Some of the executives looked away, others exchanged awkward glances. Lawrence's jaw clenched. "I'm serious," she continued. "Daniel has a perspective we've overlooked, and considering the way some of our divisions are bleeding money, I'd say we could use all the perspective we can get." Martin exhaled through his nose. "All right," he said, folding his arms and leaning back. Then he looked at Daniel, the smirk returning. "Go on then. Impress us." The room went silent again. Daniel could feel every eye locked on him, waiting, expecting him to trip over his words, to say something naive, to remind them all that he didn't belong. His throat was dry. His hands were damp with sweat. For a moment, he thought about standing up and walking out, pretending he'd misunderstood, pretending he had somewhere else to be. But then he remembered. He remembered the nights sitting at the dining room table with his father, breaking down market trends, reading through old business journals his dad bought secondhand. He remembered being 14 and learning to analyze balance sheets for fun. He remembered losing his father and everything they had built together. And for the first time in years, something clicked. He looked directly at Martin. His voice was steady now. "You're worried about the underperforming assets," he said. Martin raised an eyebrow. "Obviously." Daniel nodded, but not out of hesitation, out of certainty. "I read the reports," he said. "The problem isn't the assets themselves, it's how you're evaluating them." A quiet murmur moved across the room. Martin scoffed. "Oh, really? And how should we be evaluating them?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. His voice didn't shake. "The way a smart investor evaluates a company during a downturn, not based on what it's worth right now, but what it could be worth with the right strategy." The murmuring stopped. Elena smiled just a little. This is what she'd been waiting for. But no one was prepared for what came next, because Daniel didn't just talk. He started backing it up, with numbers, with insights, with analysis that even the senior executives had missed. He referenced quarterly margins, long-term growth patterns, and internal reports some of them hadn't even read yet. The energy in the room shifted. Just minutes ago, Daniel had been a janitor, an outsider, a token guest, but now he had the room. Real attention. Not politeness, not indulgence, but focus. The kind people give when they suddenly realize they might have misjudged someone. Badly. Martin leaned back, arms folded tighter now. The smirk was gone. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's say we look at potential value instead of current value. What exactly are we missing?" Daniel took a breath. He turned to Lawrence, the CFO. "The logistics division," he said. Lawrence blinked. "What? How did you—" "I read the reports," Daniel interrupted. "You're losing money because you're outsourcing distribution instead of optimizing the resources you already have." Another silence. Daniel didn't stop. "In the last 2 quarters, the cost margins on your outsourcing contracts have gone up 12%. Meanwhile, your internal fleet, trucks, staff, routes, is operating at less than half its capacity. You're paying premium rates for something you could handle in-house, for less." The room was still. No one interrupted him now, because now they were listening. Lawrence shifted in his seat. "We ran models that suggested otherwise," he said cautiously. Daniel didn't flinch. "Your models were based on outdated fuel cost projections and pre-pandemic freight rates," he replied calmly. "Those numbers don't apply anymore." The room froze. The only movement came from a junior executive, Alyssa Chen, who quickly began scrolling through the company dashboard on her tablet. Her eyes widened. "He's right," she muttered under her breath. Daniel continued, his voice steadier now. "You're sitting on millions in underutilized assets," he said. "Instead of laying people off, restructure your distribution model. Use your own fleet. Cut outsourcing by even 30%, and you save at least $8 million annually." A senior analyst leaned forward. "If that's true," he asked, "why didn't we see it?" Daniel turned toward him without hesitation. "Because you weren't looking for it." Another murmur spread across the table. Executives exchanged glances. Someone whispered to their neighbor. Even Martin, who had been visibly skeptical from the start, had gone silent, his face tight, jaw locked. Then Elena finally spoke. "That's exactly why Daniel is here," she said quietly. The weight of her words hit the room like a slow-moving thunderclap. Daniel swallowed. He couldn't tell if he'd just made a career or a mistake. But then Lawrence leaned in slightly, voice lower now. "Can you show us how to implement it?" he asked. This was it, the moment. Daniel could back down, say he didn't know, pretend he was just lucky, or he could step into it. He clenched his fists under the table, steadied his breath, and said simply, "Yes." And yet, no one was ready for what Elena said next. The silence stretched again, longer this time. This was no longer just a moment of surprise. This was the kind of silence that comes after a shift in power, when a room knows something irreversible has just happened. Daniel had done more than speak up. He had changed the conversation, and everyone in the room knew it. Lawrence rubbed his jaw. "You're saying we could recover $8 million in costs just from restructuring logistics?" Daniel nodded once. Across the table, Alyssa was still flipping through numbers, whispering under her breath. "It actually checks out," she said, almost to herself. Another executive leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You figured all of this out just by reading the reports?" Daniel paused. He could feel all of them watching him again, but this time it wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity, respect, maybe even hope. "I pay attention," he said simply. That answer landed heavier than expected. A few exchanged quiet looks, some impressed, others uneasy. But Elena, she was smiling now. She turned to Lawrence. "How long have we been searching for a new financial consultant?" Lawrence blinked. 6 months, he said. Elena nodded, then turned to Daniel. "Do you want the job?" The air shifted so suddenly it felt like the room had tilted. Daniel stiffened. "What?" "I'm offering you a job," she said, her tone even. "Financial consultant, effective immediately." The silence shattered. Martin's chair scraped loudly across the marble floor as he stood up. "Elena, be serious," he barked. "You're offering a janitor a consultant position? Just like that?" She didn't blink. "Yes." Lawrence pinched the bridge of his nose. "With all due respect, this isn't how we hire people." Elena's tone changed, sharper now. "It is today." Martin laughed, dry, shocked. "You can't just—" "I own this company, Martin," Elena said, tilting her head. "I can do whatever I want." And just like that, the room froze again. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Just moments ago, he was still the janitor, the man who cleaned up after these very people. Now, he was being offered a seat at the table. I don't even have a degree," he said quietly. Elena waved a hand. "Half the people running billion-dollar funds don't either," she said flatly. She leaned in. Her voice softened, but her words didn't lose weight. "I don't care about diplomas, Daniel. I care about results. You saw something no one else in this room did. You solved a problem that's been draining our profits for over a year, and I don't reward talent by letting it disappear." Daniel's hands were damp. His chest was tight. He could barely breathe. I don't know what to say." Elena smiled. "Say yes." He should have hesitated. He should have overthought it. He should have told himself this wasn't his world. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the janitor anymore. He felt like someone who belonged. Daniel took a breath. And then he said the one word that would change everything. Yes. But even then, no one, not even Daniel, was ready for what would come next. The boardroom was still buzzing when the meeting wrapped up. Executives filtered out in quiet groups, some whispering under their breath, others stealing glances at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. Some were stunned, others were quietly impressed. But Daniel was still sitting there, trying to catch up, trying to believe it was real. Just an hour ago, he was a man with a mop. Now he had a voice, a role, a future. And the door that had always been closed, it wasn't just open now. It had been kicked off its hinges. Elena didn't rush to speak. She simply watched Daniel with that calm, deliberate gaze, the kind that made it clear this moment was no accident. She had planned all of it. "Walk with me," she said. Daniel hesitated, but followed. They stepped into a private elevator, the one he'd seen 100 times but never entered. The doors slid shut with a soft hum. Silence filled the space, just the low sound of the elevator rising. Then Elena spoke. "You think this was luck?" she asked, pressing the button for the top floor. Daniel shifted, unsure. "Wasn't it?" She let out a quiet laugh and shook her head. "No, Daniel, it wasn't." He frowned. "I don't understand." She turned to him, eyes sharp and steady. "I did my research," she said. "Before I ever walked into that break room, before I invited you to the boardroom, I already knew everything I needed to know. Daniel's stomach tightened. What do you mean? I know your father ran a small business. I know you dropped out of college when he passed. I know you've taken jobs far beneath your ability because life didn't give you many options. He looked down, his fists clenched slightly. I also know, she continued, that for the past 3 years, you've been reading financial reports during your breaks in a janitor's closet, that you check stock trends on your phone before your shift starts, that you've quietly built a level of insight that most professionals overlook entirely. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. Her words hit deeper than he expected. This wasn't a whim. She had seen him. Long before today. The elevator chimed. The doors opened into a space most people in the building had never seen. Elena's private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in sunlight, the city skyline stretching out in every direction. She stepped in. Come. He followed. This company needs people who see what others miss, she said, walking toward her desk. People who don't sit quietly while bad decisions get nodded through. She turned to him fully. That's why I hired you. Daniel let out a breath. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted. Elena tilted her head. Why not? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Because I've spent my whole life being told that people like me don't get jobs like this. Her eyes narrowed and her voice softened, but only in volume, not in power. Then let me be the first to tell you, they were wrong. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her. And in that moment, something began to shift inside him. She leaned back against her desk and crossed her arms. You have 2 choices, she said. You can let fear shrink you back into the background, or you can do what you've always done. Pay attention, learn fast, and prove everyone in that boardroom wrong. There was a long pause. Then Daniel nodded. I'm in. A small smirk touched Elena's lips. Good, because your first official task starts tomorrow. The next morning, Daniel walked into Harrington Enterprises not as the janitor, but as a consultant. And this time, everyone noticed. As he stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, heads turned. Some curious, some skeptical, a few unmistakably hostile. He didn't belong in their eyes, but Elena's words echoed in his mind. You were lied to. The suit jacket she'd sent to his apartment that morning wasn't flashy, but it fit, and that was all that mattered. Near the conference room, Alyssa Chen was waiting for him. She gave him a glance, measuring, unreadable, then handed him a folder thick with reports. Hope you're ready, she said. They're not going to take it easy on you. Daniel opened the folder, flipping through the data. His voice was calm. Good. I wouldn't want them to. Alyssa gave the faintest smile before she pushed open the door. Inside, the executives were already seated. Martin Caldwell didn't even look at Daniel. Lawrence, the CFO, adjusted his glasses. Let's get to it, he said. Harrington wants a logistics strategy. Cost savings, clear plan. Show us what you've got. Daniel took his seat. He unfolded his notes, spread them across the table. His heartbeat was steady. There was no panic this time, no hesitation, because he knew the system, knew where the waste was, knew how to fix it. And finally, he knew he belonged here. He looked around the room. Then, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years being underestimated, he began to speak. Life doesn't always give you the opportunities you deserve. Sometimes the world decides who you're supposed to be, and if you believe it, you stay stuck. But talent doesn't come with a title, and brilliance doesn't need permission. Sometimes the only difference between cleaning the table and sitting at it is a single chance. Daniel didn't make it because he got lucky. He made it because he was ready, long before anyone realized it. So if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this. You don't need the world's approval to be great. You just need one person to really see you. If this story moved you, like, share, and comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated, tell us your story. We're listening. Because sometimes, it only takes one voice to change everything.